Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So glad to have you with us as we study in the book of Genesis. We finished up the flood, the ark, the flood, Noah, except now we have the post flood. And this message is for October 2nd, 2022. But of course, you can listen to it anytime you want, day or night, and any date. Let's open our Bibles, if we would please, to Genesis chapter 9, and we're going to be starting with verse 18. And this is about Noah's far-reaching prophetic utterance. Now, there's not very many prophetic passages, prophecies that Noah gives, but he gives this one, and it's very, very far-reaching, and there are some accompanying bits of information that are complex and are not easily deciphered by many people in the Bible. And there is some things about wine drinking and drunkenness. And so we have to make a comment about that. And there's a lot of disagreement over what the Bible teaches about wine drinking. So we're going to get into that as well. But Noah's far-reaching prophetic utterances. The first thing that we see in Genesis 9 and verse 18, it says, "Now the sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem and Ham and Japheth. And Ham was the father of Canaan." Now, why is that important? Doesn't say anything else about the other sons of Noah having sons, although later it does, but not in this particular passage, because there is something particular about the son of Ham that pertains to this particular passage, and so you have to keep that in mind. So once again it says, who came out of the ark were Shem and Ham and Japheth, and Ham was the father of Canaan. Okay, so it's giving you a heads up as to what's coming, something important, and this is why Canaan was mentioned. And Shem is mentioned first, although he is the middle son. Japheth is the oldest, and Ham is the youngest. And then once again, only Canaan is mentioned as a grandson. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was populated. So all the people of the earth that we presently have in the earth came from Noah. You can go all the way back to Adam, of course, but they all pinch point to Noah because of the flood, and then his three sons. Of course, there were women in there too. You can't have sons without women, or daughters either. And so they had wives also. But everybody that is on the earth is related to Noah. And this is something to keep in mind. You know, when I was a young man going to college, they said, "What race are you? White, Hispanic, Negro, whatever, you know." And I was supposed to check one of those. And I always thought that was kind of odd because the fact of the matter is there's only one race, and it's the human race. And all these other distinctions, we could intermarry, we could have children. It's not like we're a different species, you know. So I always thought it was kind of a false distinction. When I was a young man, I grew up in a very mixed neighborhood. I had a paper route, got into everybody's homes. I had blacks, I had Hispanics, I had Italian, German. These people actually spoke the original languages, Italian and German and Polish. There were English people. There were people from the mountains of West Virginia, if you know what I mean. and Southern people. I had everybody. And when I went to school in the 1950s, my school was already integrated. And so my playmates were all different types of people. Had a black roommate at Ohio State University in the late 60s and early 70s. Um, I had I usually had mixed churches. I had some black people in my church, and I was a missionary to Africa. And I've married people of different races, and so this is all rather odd to me. This distinction that is made between the different people. Now, I have my druthers. I married a redhead because they caught my eye. And this one particular redhead, I like redheads. I prefer them over blondes. I guess I'm prejudiced. But the truth of the matter is, I suppose we all have a little uh, things that we like one way or another, but that doesn't make us racists. And all all the people then got isolated, maybe over here or over there, north or south or east or west. And as they intermarried and were isolated, maybe hair colors of certain way dominated, waviness or not, straight hair, eye color, blue, brown, hazel, dominated skin color, dominated in certain places, musculature, height, and so some areas of the world maybe were dominated by whiter skin and darker skin and in between and eye color and hair color and but the fact of the matter is they're all human, we're all from the same blood. And the Bible doesn't make that distinction that they couldn't intermarry. This is something that was made a big deal about because of prejudices. Now, Japheth being the oldest, and his name means God will enlarge, and he is the progenitor of the more remote peoples north of Israel, and goes on up into Russia, includes Greece and northern Turkey, Rome, the European peoples, the northern Asian peoples, Russians, that sort of thing. People up around the Black Sea, the Caspian Sea, and so it says here in 10:2, the sons of Japheth were Gomer and Magog and Madai and Javan and Tubal and Meshech and Tiras, and it mentions all these peoples. It says, from these the coastlands of the nations were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, according to their families and their nations, you see. And so there was Tower of Babel and confusion of languages, and people kind of spread that way also. And so one of them that stands out particularly is Magog, and that keeps coming up, that particular people sect. It says something about that in Ezekiel chapter 38. I'm almost there already. It says here in verse 2 and 3, Son of man, set your face toward Gog of the land of Magog. So Gog is maybe like a king or something, and Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, and prophesy against them. So if you look at those names, they seem to be names that come from Japheth. You go a little bit more into chapter 38 to verse 14. Therefore prophesy, Son of man, and say to Gog, Thus says the Lord, the God, on that day when my people Israel are living securely, will you not know it? You will come from your place out of the remote parts of the north, you and many peoples with you, all of them riding on horses, a great assembly and a mighty army. And it keeps going, my land, so that the nations may know me when I am sanctified through you, being their eyes, O Gog. So there's Magog. Then this Gog and Magog becomes kind of a catchphrase for hordes of people, and this is from the north, and it uses Gog and Magog as a great horde of people in the very end, attacking the city of Jerusalem, the holy city, and God, this is at the end of the millennium, God will bring down fire from heaven. You'll find this in Revelation 20 and verse 8. Well, now, that's a little bit about Japheth. And so this foundation chapter reiterates some of these names that are picked up and carried on forward. And Gog and Magog are understood to be offspring of Japheth, and in the Russian area, Caspian Sea, north of the Black Sea, Ukraine, that sort of area. And so then you have Shem. He's the middle son. And Shem is a progenitor of Iraq, Iran, Aram, many Arabian countries, and Lower Turkey. And Shem is the keeper of the faith. Now, Noah had given the prophecy. Remember, I had mentioned about the prophecy that Noah was going to give. And in that prophecy, it says in verse 26 of chapter 9, Genesis, he also said, Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. And it also says, May God enlarge Japheth and let him dwell in the tents of Shem. Shem is kind of like the keeper of the faith, and he has more of a bend of religiosity than the others. He's more concerned about these things. You know, you go to family reunions, and there always seems to be somebody who's more interested in the family tree and who is related to who, and they sit down and they'll go over maybe the newest findings of relatives in the past and who's been born, and they'll work on the family tree, and not everybody's interested in that. And all of these details and the particulars of faith. Sometimes in a family, you'll have like a mother-in-law, a mother, or perhaps it's the father, and they're very much interested in spiritual things, and they really try to work the holidays and point the family in the right direction. And so these are looked at as matriarchs or patriarchs and people that are particularly religious. Well, Shem was that guy. And Shem was a family that was more interested in the spiritual aspects of things. And Shem became the progenitor of the Semite. Shem, you just the S sound, sh, can also be s. And so it's the Semite. And the Semitic people are intensely religious. And from that area of the world where the Semitic people dominated came Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Very, very interesting, isn't it? Japheth will benefit immensely in Shem's tents. And the main religion of the Japhetic people Up in the north and to the west is Christianity. And they, of course, Jesus was Jewish and propagated what was belief in him as the Messiah. And of course, Japheth's people have benefited immensely from this. And so they kind of dwelt in the tent, so to speak, of Shem. And these Semitic people were a blessing. Now Ham is going to be blessed by being a servant of Shem and Japheth. But Ham is not spoken of as Ham. He's spoken of as Canaan. And of course, not all Hamites are Canaanites. Matter of fact, many people were trying to make the curse on Canaan a curse on the Hamites, which were the black people. And that doesn't work because the Canaanites are not black. There are different offspring from Ham that helped settle in Africa. And so Ham is spoken in his son Canaan in verse 25. Says, so he said, cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants, he shall be to his brothers. And then it says that Canaan shall be a servant to Shem, in verse 26, and Canaan shall be a servant to Japheth. So, whatever that means, doesn't mean that we need to enslave these people, but somehow or another there is some subservience there. So, Ham is spoken about in his son Canaan, and a difficult relationship with Japheth and Shem is had, and not all Hamitic people are Canaanites. Okay. Now the Canaanites, the Hamites, let's put it this way, the Hamites, from them came Nimrod, and of course that meant Old Babylon, and also Assyria, which is the main city is Nineveh, and they were very cruel. And then the Canaanite cities down the coast of Israel, which were very staunch, walled, difficult, warring people, were Hamite. And then down in Egypt and the kingdom of Egypt and the pharaohs and stuff were Hamitic. And these were tough people. And so you had Nimrod, who started the first kingdom, and the ziggurats and all that sort of thing. And then you have the pyramids down in Egypt, and you had these people that were conquerors and very, very difficult, tough people to dislodge. So keep that in mind. So we are going to look now at this telling situation that happened to Noah. Verse 20, then Noah began farming and planted a vineyard. No doubt he probably had vines and stuff like that perhaps on the ark, at least starts of them, or grapes and stuff that he could grow vines from seed. Might have taken a while even to get this up and flying, but he planted a vineyard, and these therefore existed before the flood. And he drank of the wine and became drunk, and uncovered himself inside his tent. Now, there was a lot of change after the flood. This environment and more bacterias, more viruses, more intense heat, difficulty in preserving foods, and of course more acidification, more yeast. And so this would get into the squeezing of the grapes. And we know that if 75 degrees or hotter prevailed during your wine making, it would tend toward acidification or vinegar. If it was below 75 degrees, between 50 and 75 degrees, then the yeast process would prevail, and that would make the yeast dominate, and the yeast would eat the sugar, live off the sugar, and their waste product is alcohol. And when they got to about 11% concentration alcohol in the wine, the yeast died and couldn't make any more because it couldn't live in that alcohol. Its own byproduct, its own waste killed it. And so this wine perhaps was affected by the yeast, maybe something that hadn't been a problem before the flood. And Noah might have been caught unawares drinking this, and the yeast process rapidly had produced alcohol, and he became drunk. Nevertheless, this is the first time that drunkenness and even the vine, grapes, were mentioned in the Bible. And perhaps he got flush and hot, and to deal with the heat process, it might have been overly warm. Of course, he uncovered himself. And some cultures are more concerned about nudity. They're very careful about things. So this particular culture of Noah was very careful about nudity. And so there we have that he was uncovered and he had become drunk. Now, a few comments about the nature of wine. Since it's mentioned the first drunkenness of the Bible, wine is problematic because wine in its potent form can make you drunk. And so the Bible has always, always, always spoken against drunkenness. Now, back at that time, they didn't know alcohol content, they didn't know percentages, and they didn't have it all figured out exactly how much you could drink and still not be drunk. And so, as a precaution, most of the time, the prevailing godly people diluted their wine and it made it sub-alcoholic. You could drink it a long time and not even get a buzz. So they diluted that. And that was the common drink at the time, made the water safe also. And they'd mix it in with the water. And that little bit of alcohol that was in there would kill whatever little germs and amoebas were in there. And it made a safer drink for the people. Every once in a while, people would decide they wanted to drink the undiluted stuff, and that was considered barbaric at the time. Most of the people didn't drink wine. They didn't even have access very much to wine. Only a certain amount of time in the year did they have it, and they'd go through it pretty fast, and the rest of it either turned to vinegar or they had to boil it so they could preserve it so it wouldn't turn to vinegar, and then they would rehydrate it with water and then drink it. In the spring of the year, when Jesus made wine, it was a surprise to them that this was a good sweet stuff, because most of the time the wine they had at that time was wine that was from the previous year and diluted. Well, wine is a problem. And Nadab and Abihu, who were sons of Aaron, they were Levites. They made a mistake with wine. Perhaps they were being too frisky, too wrong, but they got into wine and drank it, and they presented a strange fire of incense before the Lord, and he burned them to a crisp. And after that time, nobody that was of the tribe of Levi serving at the temple dared drink wine when they were serving the temple. And then the kings were told not to drink strong wine, strong drink and wine. It says here in Proverbs chapter 31. And it says in verse 4, "It is not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, or for rulers to desire strong drink." So rulers, strong drink and wine are parallel, and in this instance, therefore, is talking about wine that's not diluted, it's strong wine, and for they will drink and forget what is decreed, and pervert the rights of all the afflicted. Give strong drink to him who is perishing, and wine to him whose life is bitter. So the strong drink is either beer or undiluted wine, and people who drank wine in the Bible most of the time drank it diluted. Now, leadership has to be careful. They don't want to be tipsy. They don't want to be people who forget the laws and give out bad justice because they were negligent by drinking strong drink. And Nadab and Abihu, they drank and they got burnt to a crisp by God, didn't appreciate their drunkenness. And so the Levites stay away from serving. And then also the kings. And when they were talking to the men that were pastors, Timothy being the example, Timothy was abstaining, but he was having trouble with his stomach. And he said, take a little wine for your stomach's sake. There is a medicinal aspect of alcohol, wine that is helpful. So this nakedness, I digress for a second. The study on wine is badly misunderstood, and people are willfully ignorant of the culture of the time, for the Bible wine that most people drank was diluted. And so, yeah, they drank wine. Sure, you can prove that they drank wine, but they don't go far enough in their proof to prove that this wine was diluted even as the wine, and only the drunkards and the people that willfully wanted to get drunk drank the undiluted wine. And yeah, Jesus made wine, but it was really good stuff. It was sweet stuff. Of course, that's debatable, and some people's way they talk. People spin every passage they can, but I have a 53-page paper I wrote on the wine, and most people want to stay willfully ignorant, and they want to drink this distilled stuff, shots of whiskey and chasers of beer, and the whiskey and distilled stuff wasn't even around during the time of the Bible. And stuff, people, that's just drugging yourself. And it is not sanctioned by the Bible. And yet people want to prove from the Bible all the time that they can drink this strong stuff. Well, it's they want to be willfully ignorant. Now, this nakedness, going back to this nakedness, I think Noah was a righteous man, and he just got caught up. Didn't realize that this was strongly alcoholic. Maybe it was a more advanced thing than before the flood, because of the degeneration of things, germs and stuff. And so he was uncovered, and something happened where Canaan was involved. And it's not real specific, but it was enough that it was quite stirring to Noah, and he made a prophetic utterance. All right, let's get to specifics here. Noah became drunk and uncovered himself inside his tent. Verse 22, Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it upon their shoulders and walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Now that's quite a bit of carefulness, don't you think? And their faces were turned away so that they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine, he knew what his youngest son had done to him. Now, his youngest son, first generation, is Ham. But Ham had his son Canaan, and they didn't have the word for a grandchild at that time. And it was very common, if you had grandchildren, you called them your sons. And so he said, Cursed be Canaan. He didn't say cursed be Ham. He said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants he shall be to his brothers. And so that was what was said. There was a curse placed upon Canaan. And notice when it says, when Noah awoke from his wine, he knew what his youngest son had done to him, or did to him. Now, I don't know what he did to him. Maybe it was just that he saw that he was naked. Ham saw that he was naked too. But Canaan was the one who was cursed. There was something done. We don't know what that was, but we can't specifically say. We can't prove what it was. And so, some speculate that there was some homosexual act that was done by Canaan. Can't prove that by that passage. It might be there, but we can't prove it. And so that's speculation. However, the Canaanites were well known for their lewd sexual practices in their religion. And they did all kinds of awful, tough stuff, including sacrifice of their children. And all I can say is that the Canaanites were cursed, and they had this awful religion. Sodom and Gomorrah were Canaanites. And, Lot went and lived among Sodom and Gomorrah, and he didn't have a good effect on them. They didn't like him. He was vexed by living among them. And a matter of fact, he didn't influence them. There was more influence, I think, perhaps upon his daughters in a negative way, and it didn't work too well for him living among them. Abram, later on called Abraham, had saved the lock, stock, and barrel of them. He even pointed that his victory was because of his God, and a witness to them all in that way. And then when God came down to destroy them, he said, well, I guess we should tell Abram. And he said, well, can you find 10? Would you destroy if you could find 10 righteous people? Well, no, we wouldn't do that. Well, they couldn't find 10. There was no one converted. No one placed their faith in God from all that Abram had done in saving them. And so God moves Lot out of there. And then he has this statement made in Genesis 15. He does this covenant with Abraham. And then he has these animals cut in half, and then a fiery furnace and a flaming lamp go through the midst, and Abraham's put to sleep over on the side in the stupor. He can see this, but he can't participate because it's a one-sided covenant. God is the one who's making this promise. It doesn't depend on anything that Abraham has done. And then he says, know for certain, verse 13, that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years, by Hamites, by the way. But I will judge the nations whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions. As for you, you shall go to your father's peace. You will be buried at a good old age. Then in the fourth generation, 100 years for each generation, that's 400 years. Then in the fourth generation they will return here, Sodom and Gomorrah and areas around, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. And so the Amorites were Canaanites as well. And so they will wax worse and worse, and they won't want to turn to God in any way, and God will use the nation of Israel to judge them. So these people are cursed. They're not going to improve. And so there's this thing that's said. So God uses Israel to judge the Canaanites by fighting them and also pushing them out of that land, although they couldn't do it with the really tough cities in the Gaza Strip. And their religion was sexually perverse and also involves child sacrifice. And Israel did not remove them, and this tripped them up badly. And now that Israel's back in there, they're still having problem with the Gaza Strip and those Canaanites. So this thing that Canaan did, whatever it was, can't prove exactly what it was, but it gave rise and seed and a beginning to a very perverse, farther out, poor acting, false religion, lewd sexual practices, and you want to be very careful in your growth, young people, that you do not cross those little tiny lines, kind of unwritten tiny lines. There's thousands of them. And you keep crossing those lines and you don't back away from them, you're going to end up way over here. And my friends, the battle is going on in our high schools as young people. They don't want to be glad that they're a male. They don't want to be glad that they're a female. They don't want to be heterosexual. They think it's fine to just cross lines and blur things. They don't even want to be called for by the proper pronoun of he or she. There are people that want to be furries. They think that they're cats or whatever. I mean, friends, these decisions that you're making as young people, you really ought to think where you're going to end up. And it's very important for you to make a decision to live a righteous life. There is such a thing as sin, and you don't want to end up where this logically takes you in the end. So, my friends, these things in the book of Genesis and the mistakes that they make, these are being played out before our eyes, and we want to be careful where we end up.